On December 27th, 1996, Marvel Entertainment Group did something that changed everything. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Within weeks, their stock collapsed to under $1 per share. Creditors circled, investors fled. This was a company that once generated over $800 million in annual revenue, suddenly unable to pay its own bills. The same Marvel that created Spider-Man, X-Men, and the Avengers was now fighting just to survive. But here's the part no one understood at the time. This wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't just the comic book market collapsing. It was a decision that would cost Marvel hundreds of millions of dollars and nearly erase the company entirely. To understand what happened, you have to understand what Marvel used to be. Marvel was founded in 1939, originally as timely publications. By the 1960s, under creators like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Marvel redefined what superheroes could be. These weren't perfect gods, they were flawed, human, relatable. By the early 1990s, Marvel dominated the comic book industry. At its peak in 1993, annual revenue exceeded $800 million. Comic sales reached over 80 million copies per year. Marvel controlled nearly 40% of the US comic market. But they weren't just selling comics, they were shaping culture. Spider-Man wasn't just a character, he was an identity. X-Men weren't just stories, they reflected real-world themes of discrimination and belonging. For years, Marvel was untouchable. Demand was exploding. Collectors were buying multiple copies of the same issue, treating comics like financial assets. It looked like infinite growth, and that illusion is exactly what broke them. By 1994, the cracks were already forming. The comic boom wasn't real demand, it was speculation. Publishers, including Marvel, flooded the market with special editions variant covers, collector issues. The assumption was simple: more supply equals more profit. But the market couldn't absorb it. At the same time, retail comic stores began collapsing. Distributors struggled to survive. Reader interest declined. Sales dropped sharply. Comic circulation fell by more than 30% in just 2 years. Marvel's market share slipped. For the first time in decades, they weren't leading, they were reacting. And internally, things were even worse. Marvel had taken on hundreds of millions in debt after being acquired by billionaire investor Ronald Perelman in 1989. The company wasn't just a comic publisher anymore. It had become a financial machine. Acquisitions, leverage, expansion. The pressure was building, fast. Leadership knew they had to do something. The question was, what? In the mid-1990s, Marvel made a bet, a massive one. Instead of simplifying the business, they doubled down on control. They decided to vertically integrate. The logic seemed clear. First, if Marvel controlled distribution, they could capture more profit. Second, owning the supply chain would stabilize revenue. Third, it would eliminate dependency on third-party distributors. On paper, it made sense. So Marvel acquired Heroes World Distribution in 1994. The plan was aggressive. Marvel would stop using independent distributors and handle distribution internally. But strategy rarely fails in PowerPoint. It fails in execution, and execution collapsed. Retailers weren't prepared. Logistics broke down. Orders were delayed. Inventory didn't arrive. Stores couldn't stock products. Within months, Marvel didn't just disrupt competitors, they disrupted themselves. Comic shops, their primary customers, began going out of business. Instead of stabilizing revenue, Marvel had cut off its own distribution lifeline. The reaction was immediate. Retailers revolted, distributors collapsed, investors panicked. Within 2 years, Marvel's revenue dropped from $800 million to under $300 million. The company lost over 60% of its market value. Debt ballooned to over $700 million. By 1996, it was over. Marvel filed for bankruptcy, but it didn't stop there. To survive, Marvel was forced to do something unthinkable. They sold off their most valuable assets. Spider-Man film rights were sold to Sony. X-Men rights went to Fox. Hulk rights were licensed out. These weren't small deals. These were the core of the brand. What was meant to create control had instead stripped the company of its future. Competitors gained ground. The comic industry shrank, and Marvel was no longer an empire. It was a licensing company trying to survive. What went wrong? It came down to 3 things. Lesson 1, strategic miscalculation. First, Marvel confused control with stability. Owning more of the system feels powerful, but control without capability creates fragility. They believed vertical integration would protect margins. Instead, it exposed operational weakness. Businesses often confuse ownership with efficiency. Toward alignment with real demand, and Marvel expanded into an illusion. On December 27, 1996, it looked like the end of Marvel. But what really happened was this: they lost control, so they could eventually rebuild it differently. Because in business, one decision rarely kills a company, but it can change everything. And in Marvel's case, the real cost wasn't bankruptcy. It was losing the very characters that would later contribute to the rebuild of the empire.
So that's it. For more business stories, more hidden patterns, like and subscribe to The Firm Lore. And also, don't forget to let us know your opinions in the comment section.